punished a young driver who left his grandmother dead in the cold. Maxim saw an elderly woman in tattered clothing standing at the side of the road with a basket of apples in her hand as he was operating a bus on the outskirts of Moscow. Since there was no formal halt there, he was initially reluctant to stop. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. However, he stopped the bus next to the elderly woman and motioned for her to board when he saw that she was falling and could not stand. Before Maxim set off, he requested the grandma to sit down because there were no seats occupied, and she was still standing in the center of the bus. She went up to him instead and gave him some apple seeds to eat. She was yelled at by the driver, who claimed to have known she intended to take the bus for free and accused her of attempting to offer him apples in order to avoid having to pay for a ticket. While the grandma stayed composed and utterly silent, everyone on the bus could see how unhappy the man was with her. A little while later, the driver saw that the other busgoers were growing irritated with the elderly woman. He pulled the bus to a halt, opened the door, and told Marva Evgenichna that she was only using her age as an excuse to receive freebies. Then he urged her to get off the vehicle right away. A bunch of young men sitting in the rear of the bus, meantime, complimented the driver for his actions and carried on making fun of and laughing at the elderly woman. As she stepped off the bus, the grandma carried her basket of apples with trembling hands. Unaware that it was the final bus of the evening, she remained outside, waiting for another one as night fell. She waited some longer, but no buses came. She tried, but was unsuccessful, to wave down passing automobiles while standing at the side of the road. Her agony was exacerbated by the gloomy night and the heavy snowfall. The elderly woman periodically paused to relax as she strolled down the roadside. She continued to move idly, even though she knew she couldn't walk all the way home. She was wearing a flimsy coat that was not quite warm enough to keep the cold from stinging her. In a modest apartment in the heart of Moscow, grandmother Marva Evgenichna lives by herself. She frequently visits the home in the hamlet where she was raised, which is roughly 40 kilometers outside Moscow, when fall approaches. She spends most of her time in the cozy wooden cottage, away from the bustle of the city, where she also waters the flowers they cultivate and tends to the fruit trees. Nowadays, all of her children have their own families and hardly ever see her. Despite being over 75, she is finding it more and more difficult to care for herself. Feeling exhausted and frustrated with his job's modest pay, Maxim went home upset. Abruptly, he thought about the elderly woman with the apple basket and started blaming himself for her mistreatment. Thinking about it, he saw that he had been too hasty to condemn her. What did he observe? He had offended a woman who only wanted to give him apple seeds to help him relax. He couldn't stop thinking about the grandma, so he got up, put on his coat, got into his car, and went back to the station where he had left her. He couldn't even eat supper. Since there were no more buses arriving and it was really chilly, he thought that she would probably be stuck. Even in her thin, tattered clothing, he knew she couldn't stand it. Marva wasn't at the station when the 36-year-old guy got there. He drove around the region in the hopes of seeing her, but he was unsuccessful. Maxim grudgingly withdrew after losing all chance of locating her, speculating that she could have been stolen by another onlooker. Maxim declined to report to work the next day. He was extremely troubled and unhappy with what he had done. He began to think about looking for alternative employment after realizing that his current position was not only unfulfilling, but also insufficient to meet his demands. Even though he had only glanced at the elderly woman once, the image of her face remained in his mind as he sat at home with his head in his hands. Knowing that she hadn't earned such abuse, he wanted to offer her a hug and ask for her forgiveness. He will always remember the date of October 15th, the day he insulted her. No matter how uncomfortable he felt, he made the decision that day to never do it again with an old person. After several months, Maxim secured a respectable position and began receiving a respectable pay. He was able to purchase a decent apartment and move in with his family after saving money. The man had previously traveled from apartment to apartment, always looking for the lowest rent. so he was thrilled to have his own residence. Maxim was shocked to see dusty old clothing in the flat he had purchased from a young man. Every piece of furniture was ancient, and it didn't seem feasible that a young guy could have lived in such a mess or worn an old woman's clothing. With his wife's assistance, Maxim made the decision to get rid of everything in order to make space for his family's possessions. He came into a picture book while cleaning out the flat. He pulled it open and began to study the images. One of the photos, of Marva Evgenichna, the lady he had abused on the bus, caught Maxim off guard. Before his wife arrived and requested him to assist her in carrying some items, the man experienced an odd sensation and remained motionless for a few minutes. "Who is this young man who sold me the apartment?" he asked himself as he carried the things. "Why does that old woman's picture appear here?" He was plagued by all of these questions, but he was unable to find the answers and continued to be in a trance. Maxim made the decision to inquire about the grandma over the phone with the young man who had sold him the property. Indifferently, the young guy said that she was his grandma and had been living alone in the flat for a number of years. His mother made the decision to sell the flat when she abruptly left everything and vanished. The young man acknowledged that he hadn't seen his grandma in years and hadn't tried to find her when Maxim asked him where she was or if he had paid her a visit. Additionally, the young man acknowledged that his mother had once phoned the grandmother to request financial assistance for her education, which resulted in the grandmother giving her the apartment to sell. After that, she left the city and never came back. Maxim was startled to hear that the grandmother had given up everything she owned in order to support her daughter and grandchildren. He recognized right away that she was a good-hearted and kind lady who didn't merit the torture she endured. He had heard her name from her grandson, and it was verified that she had occupied that flat. Maxim tried to figure out how to get in touch with her, but she left no trace because she didn't have a phone or an address. Despite being in that flat, Maxim couldn't help but think of Marva. In an attempt to discover her address, he started asking every old woman he came across if they knew her. He remained hopeful that he would locate her. Maxim had to travel to a city 200 kilometers away on a business trip one October day. His vehicle broke down close to a tiny settlement as he was driving. Nobody was stopping to assist him, and it was snowing fiercely. In order to get help, he parked his car on the side of the road and headed toward the hamlet. He had to travel 3 kilometers to get to the village despite the intense fog and poor vision. Maxim saw wooden boards in the shape of crosses in the ground as he moved. It dawned on him abruptly that he was in a graveyard. He walked on, trying to maintain his composure. He saw an elderly woman seated next to a grave as he got closer to the cemetery's perimeter. He was taken aback as she turned to face him. It was Marva Evgenichna, dressed in a black coat, a red hat, a black scarf, and a shawl. Maxim was shocked to learn that it was October 15th, the day he had first seen the elderly woman years before. As the grandma leaned on one of the tombs and gazed at him, he stood there shaking and then started talking loudly to her. "I apologize for what I did to you that day, Marva Evgenichna. I was in a foul mood since I was exhausted and lacked the funds to buy meals for my kids. That day, I searched for you but was unable to locate you. I've been hunting for you all these years." He closed his eyes and whispered, "I sincerely apologize." Marva Evgenichna was gone when he opened his eyes. He walked around the cemetery in a daze, shouting her name loudly, but she was not there. He pictured her as a mother who had died when he was a boy, and he wanted to grasp her hand and carry her home with him so she could live with him. However, she was no longer there. Vasily Ivanovich was the man Maxim encountered as he proceeded toward the settlement. He had just seen Marva Evgenichna at the graveyard, so he questioned him about her. "She died more than a year ago," Vasily informed him. He said Maxim, the grandmother, had moved to the area years before, lived in a little wooden cottage, and had become quite ill. The locals cared for her till she died, but none of her family paid her any visits. Hearing this, Maxim was so distraught that he collapsed to his knees and began to cry. After helping him stand up and escorting him to his house, Vasily phoned a village mechanic to fix his vehicle. Maxim was very grateful to Vasily for his assistance. Maxim immediately started providing food, money, and assistance with carrying items to any old folks he spotted on the street. He vowed never to treat them badly ever again. His life was drastically altered by the lesson he learned from the tragedy with Marva Evgenichna. Since older individuals sometimes wind up alone after making sacrifices for their family, he urged everyone to treat them with care. I appreciate you viewing. We'll be back soon with more stories. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.